J-Lo, on the run, after judge orders. Arrested over witnesses' shocking testimony in Diddy case. Jennifer Lopez is now at the center of a legal and media storm after a judge issued a warrant linked to resurfaced testimony in the decades-old nightclub shooting case involving music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. This is not tabloid speculation. This is the fallout from a case many believed was closed until key witnesses returned demanding the truth be heard. What began as a night out at Club New York in December 1999 is now under renewed scrutiny, not just by the public, but by federal investigators following explosive claims that point to cover-ups, coercion, and an orchestrated silence. It was a cold night, December 27, 1999, when chaos broke out inside one of Manhattan's most popular nightclubs. A young woman, later identified as Natanya Rubin, was struck in the face by a bullet. In her first public testimony decades later, she described in chilling detail how she saw the guns drawn, the muzzle flash, and then darkness. "I felt my face explode," she recounted. "I knew who fired the weapon. There's no doubt in my mind." That night, 3 people were injured, and while rapper Moses Shine Barrow was swiftly arrested and later sentenced to nearly a decade in prison, others walked away. Among them, Diddy and his then-girlfriend, global pop icon Jennifer Lopez. Lopez was detained briefly but released after claiming no knowledge of the firearm found in the vehicle she and Combs were using to flee the scene. Charges against her were dropped. For years, that moment disappeared into silence. But now, that silence has shattered. In court this week, testimony from former driver Wardell Fenderson reignited suspicion. Fenderson, now a star witness for the prosecution, claimed that Combs was not only armed the night of the shooting, but later pressured him into taking the fall. "He said he'd make it worth my while," Fenderson testified. $50,000 or a diamond ring, just say the gun was mine. Jurors requested a readback of that testimony alongside references to Jennifer Lopez's behavior during the incident. One officer recalled how Lopez, unlike the others, attempted to walk away from the crime scene, stating bluntly, "I'm going home." Moments later, a firearm was discovered inside the vehicle. "It's not my gun," she reportedly said. But her swift release and minimal questioning raised eyebrows then, and even more now. Nada Rubin's voice may be the most powerful force bringing this case back into the spotlight. At just 19 years old, she was an innocent bystander who paid the price of celebrity bravado and unchecked ego. In emotional interviews and testimony, she recounted divine warnings, flashes of violence, and the surreal stillness that followed the moment she was shot. "I didn't fall. I didn't scream. I just stood there, and everyone else ran." Rubin has always insisted the shooter wasn't Shine, but Diddy. Her story remained unchanged for over 2 decades, brushed off by some, doubted by many. But now, her words have caught up with a justice system finally willing to listen. The trial has revealed more than just a single night's chaos. It's exposed a network of influence, manipulation, and silence. Jennifer Lopez's role, once thought peripheral, is now under renewed examination, not as a bystander, but as someone potentially involved in covering the truth. Federal agents are reportedly reinvestigating claims that Lopez may have helped dispose of the firearm or misled authorities to protect Diddy. Some legal experts suggest that the nature of her release back then, compared to the gravity of the charges, was unusual, at best obstructive, at worst, and that's not all. In the courtroom, new testimony linked Lopez to a strategy allegedly used to avoid her being forced to testify, a rumored marriage to Combs at the time, which would have granted her spousal immunity. Though never confirmed, the possibility of such a maneuver has raised serious ethical and legal concerns. Meanwhile, the industry has remained uncomfortably silent. Executives, artists, and insiders who once stood beside Combs and Lopez have distanced themselves as mounting testimony portrays a darker, hidden reality beneath the fame. Social media has erupted with calls to reopen the case, with the hashtag #JusticeForNada trending worldwide. But even beyond the trial, it's the psychology of silence that stands out. Multiple witnesses, including former associates of Diddy, describe a culture of fear and compliance. "If Puff don't rock with you, nobody rocks with you," one insider explained. People stayed close to survive. That culture may now be crumbling. The reckoning, however, is far from over. With federal charges in motion and public interest peaking, the real question remains, what did Jennifer Lopez truly know that night? And what was she willing to do to keep that knowledge hidden? As the courtroom doors close for the day, the questions are louder than ever. As jurors returned from recess, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. What had once been framed as a closed chapter in hip-hop history was now unraveling in real time. Prosecutors shifted their focus to the mechanics of the cover-up, outlining a timeline of choices that protected careers but left truth and accountability buried beneath headlines. Central to this was Shine real name Moses Barrow, the young rapper who at the height of his rising fame took the blame for the club shooting. At the time, many believed he was simply defending his mentor, but new testimony challenges that narrative entirely. According to Barrow, he was manipulated, betrayed, and ultimately sacrificed for the preservation of a brand. "They used me," he told a private panel years later. "And when it came time to speak the truth, they brought witnesses against me, witnesses Diddy paid." Barrow's words, once overlooked, have taken on new weight in light of corroborating testimony and documented patterns of coercion from multiple sources. The courtroom was presented with text messages subpoenaed from old phones showing a chilling pattern. In one exchange, members of Combs' inner circle discussed compensating a witness and managing narratives. Among the names mentioned Jennifer Lopez. The suggestion that she was privy to, or perhaps even aided in shaping a false story, has rattled the legal community. But Lopez is not the only figure under scrutiny. The broader focus now includes the ecosystem that allowed these events to play out. Investigators are digging into the industry, infrastructure managers, publicists, security teams, and executives who helped shield Combs from consequences for decades. One witness described the social cost of defying Combs. "If he turned on you, it was over. No parties, no invites, no features, no gigs." It wasn't just about loyalty, it was survival. And that's exactly what made silence so powerful. Fear kept victims quiet, insiders compliant, and the public distracted. But with Rubin's testimony now in the spotlight, the silence has finally been pierced. Her story, told in vivid detail, is not just about one night, it's about the weight of being ignored for 24 years. "I told them," she said quietly on the stand. "I told everyone what happened, but nobody wanted to hear it back then. Maybe now they will." That moment sent a chill through the gallery. The judge called for a break. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered chanting Rubin's name, holding signs demanding accountability, not just from Diddy, but from every enabler. Meanwhile, questions about Jennifer Lopez's public image have resurfaced. Once celebrated as an unstoppable icon, she now faces a different kind of spotlight, one that challenges the narrative she spent decades crafting. Her romantic history with Combs, once framed as a glamorous chapter, is now being reassessed through the lens of complicity. Media speculation has even suggested that tapes, photos, and sealed depositions may contain evidence tying Lopez more closely to events that night. While no footage has been confirmed, insiders report that certain items retrieved in federal raids are under review by prosecutors. The implications are vast. If Lopez is found to have obstructed justice or misled investigators, her legal exposure could stretch far beyond a reputation hit. For now, her legal team remains quiet. No public statements. No social media posts. Just silence. But the courtroom moves forward. In a dramatic turn, jurors requested access to previously sealed evidence, including an audio message allegedly left by Combs for Fenderson, the former driver. The contents of that message could solidify claims of witness tampering. "I just want you to feel safe," Combs reportedly said. "Your family too. We take care of our own." Prosecutors argue this was no gesture of goodwill, it was a veiled bribe. Defense attorneys, however, insist it's being twisted out of context. "There's no evidence of a crime here," one defense lawyer declared. "Just speculation and emotion." But that's where this trial diverges from the past. It is no longer only about technicalities. It's about culture power and the line between celebrity privilege and criminal evasion. Federal agents have confirmed that they're re-evaluating the 1999 shooting as part of a larger probe into Combs' alleged history of abuse and manipulation. That includes multiple civil cases involving coercion, psychological control, and disturbing patterns of behavior described by former partners and employees. As the gallery refills and the gavel drops, one thing is clear: this case is no longer just about who pulled the trigger. It's about everyone who watched it happen and stayed silent. Day 3 of witness testimony opened with a palpable shift in tone. The defense, once confident, appeared unsettled as new information linked previously dismissed accounts into a coherent, damning narrative. Jennifer Lopez, whose connection to the case had long been reduced to mere proximity, was now described by the prosecution as a potential facilitator of obstruction, one who played a crucial if quiet role in the concealment of evidence and manipulation of public perception. Her name was mentioned repeatedly, no longer in whispers, but in formal argument. Court documents revealed that after the shooting, Lopez reportedly claimed she was unaware a firearm was in the vehicle, but an officer on the scene contradicted that, testifying under oath that she walked away from the SUV while others were detained. According to the officer, Lopez stated, "I'm going home," a move seen by many as unprecedented in a situation involving gunfire injury and a discovered weapon. What makes this detail significant is the way it coincides with a timeline that prosecutors allege was constructed to shield Diddy. Within hours of their arrest, legal teams were deployed, bail was posted, media statements were released, and Lopez notably was silent. Her record of the events never challenged publicly, her image carefully preserved. But behind the scenes, things were far messier. Testimony from insiders suggested there were frantic calls, legal strategizing, and allegedly discussions of marriage not for romance, but for legal insulation. If Lopez had become Combs' wife, she would have been shielded from testifying against him under spousal privilege laws. The marriage never materialized, but the idea alone speaks volumes about the level of strategic thinking at play. And still, Nada Rubin sat in the courtroom, face marked by time, but voice steady. Her presence was a reminder of the human cost. She wept not out of weakness, but from relief. After more than 2 decades, her voice was finally being treated as evidence. Her statements, once dismissed as emotional outbursts, were now reinforced by ballistics reports, old interviews, and the confessions of men who no longer feared the consequences of speaking out. Rubin described how she hesitated to come forward, publicly worried that no one would care. "It's Diddy, it's J-Lo. Who's going to believe me over them?" But the weight of silence grew heavier each year, especially as new allegations against Combs began to surface. Allegations eerily similar in pattern and execution. And then came the turning point. Text messages from 2016 between Combs' personal assistant and Cassie Ventura, another woman now publicly accusing him of abuse, referenced a violent incident at an apartment building involving a third woman, Brianna Bongalan. These texts admitted into court, despite objections, included apologies, references to substance abuse, and a promise that the victim would be taken care of. Defense attorneys argued that the messages were unrelated from a different era and intended to confuse the jury, but prosecutors pointed to the pattern, the manipulation, the fear, the silence. It wasn't about one night. It was about the machinery of protection around a powerful figure. Jennifer Lopez, they argued, was part of that machinery. The courtroom sat still as a forensic analyst detailed how they recovered the texts confirming dates, recipients, and the identity of the senders. There was no ambiguity, no doctored screenshots, just digital footprints tracing a path from influence to intimidation. Outside cameras rolled, news anchors speculated, hashtags trended. And yet, Lopez remained unseen. Her silence has become a narrative in itself. Once known for commanding stages, she now avoids them. Her publicist declined comment. Her legal team silent, her social media inactive. But silence cannot stop momentum. Jurors listened intently as a closing argument from the prosecution framed the entire saga as a tale of celebrity privilege turned dangerous. "This isn't about fame," the prosecutor said. "It's about responsibility. And no one is above that." The defense pushed back. They portrayed Lopez as an innocent woman, swept up in chaos, mischaracterized, misremembered. "She didn't shoot anyone," one attorney argued. "She wasn't even near the weapon." But that's not what's on trial anymore. Not just the shooting, but the cover-up, the silence, the deliberate decision to protect a legacy rather than tell the truth. As the sun set on another day in court, Nada Rubin stepped outside to a wall of cameras. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. For the first time, the weight of history is on her side. As proceedings resumed, the courtroom was no longer just a venue for legal argument, it had become a mirror reflecting a deeper cultural reckoning. The trial was no longer confined to a 1999 nightclub shooting. It had grown into a national dialogue about complicity, accountability, and the machinery of fame that shields the powerful at the expense of the truth. Jurors now heard testimony from industry insiders who had until now remained in the background. One by one, they described a world behind the velvet rope, a world of control where loyalty was currency and silence was survival. In that world, Diddy reigned, and Jennifer Lopez, they claimed, was not just a passenger, but a participant. One insider recalled how, after the shooting, the first call wasn't to a lawyer, it was to a fixer. Within hours, narratives were aligned. Lopez's story was polished. "It's not my gun," she had said. But now questions swirled about whether that line was rehearsed, pre-approved, and part of a broader strategy. The prosecution introduced more than just testimony, they introduced receipts. Documents showed that following the incident, Lopez's team coordinated media responses that emphasized her innocence while subtly distancing her from Combs. Behind the scenes, however, private investigators hired by the defense tracked witnesses, intimidated sources, and ensured that one story, and only one story, would survive. Meanwhile, jurors were shown previously unreleased photos of the Lincoln Navigator taken just minutes after the shooting, blood on the seat, a weapon under the floor mat. Witnesses recalled the chaos. But one detail stood out: Jennifer Lopez had been sitting right beside the weapon's hiding spot. She claimed she didn't see it. Prosecutors asked, how is that possible? The defense maintained that she was scared, confused, and had no involvement in the crime. But with each piece of evidence, that defense grew thinner. And with each contradiction, a new image of Lopez emerged, not as a star caught in the crossfire, but as someone who knew more than she admitted and used every ounce of her influence to keep it buried. The turning point came when a former prosecutor involved in the original case admitted under oath that pressure from outside entities played a role in the handling of Lopez's charges. Though the prosecutor stopped short of naming names, the implication was clear: public relations mattered more than due process. For Nada Rubin, that revelation was both infuriating and validating. She sat stone-faced as the court acknowledged at last that justice had been distorted, that her pain had been eclipsed by celebrity spectacle. 24 years, she later told reporters, they protected their brand. I protected my face with my hands. Elsewhere in the trial, more voices joined hers. A chorus of former employees and insiders described environments of control where dissent was punished and victims were silenced with NDA's hush money or threats of exile from the industry. Some described Lopez as an active figure in this culture, not violent, but complicit. She knew how to survive in that world, one former assistant testified, and that meant keeping quiet. In a stunning cross-examination defense, lawyers attempted to discredit Rubin by questioning her memory, her motives, even her faith. But Rubin did not waver. I remember every second of that night, she said, because my life changed in that moment. And jurors seemed to agree. Their notes grew longer, their questions sharper. One request asked for clarification on whether Lopez's presence in the SUV legally implicated her under possession laws. The judge replied, you must determine whether her actions indicate knowledge or concealment. Lopez's legal team, for their part, has begun signaling a shift. Sources close to the case suggest they may attempt to argue that Lopez was manipulated much like Shine, much like Rubin, a pawn, not a player. But that narrative risks collapsing under the weight of her silence and the evidence now stacking against her. And so, the trial continues not just in court, but in the court of public opinion. Outside, protesters hold signs demanding accountability from all involved. Online debates rage. Some defend Lopez, citing her clean record since. Others say that's precisely the problem. Clean records sometimes mean cleaned up truths. Inside the courtroom is preparing for its final act. Closing arguments are near. And as one attorney said in a whisper barely audible from the gallery, it all comes down to what she knew and when. The final day of the trial began without theatrics. No surprise witnesses, no last-minute evidence, just silence, heavy, deliberate, suffocating. The kind of silence that signals something has shifted permanently. Both legal teams had exhausted their playbooks. What remained was the jury and the public trying to piece together what justice should look like after nearly a quarter century of confusion, spin, and silence. In the prosecution's closing argument, the narrative was clear. This was not about a single gunshot in a crowded club. It was about a system that elevated the powerful, insulated the famous, and trampled anyone who stood in the way of its image. The attorney spoke directly, firmly. Jennifer Lopez had the power to tell the truth that night. She had the chance to stop the lie before it started. She didn't. She walked away, and someone else paid the price. That someone, as the court had been reminded again and again, was Nada Rubin. The jury had seen the photos, heard the tapes, watched the raw emotional testimony of a woman who had spent half her life haunted by a moment the rest of the world had packaged into headlines and punchlines. And they had also seen the transformation of Shine from fall guy to whistleblower, his voice no longer protecting Diddy, but demanding reckoning. The defense did not falter. They reminded the court that Lopez was never charged, that she left the scene in confusion, not calculation, that her celebrity had made her an easy target for public fury. But as they spoke, it became clear the jury wasn't debating whether she pulled the trigger. They were debating whether she helped bury the truth. Moments after closing arguments ended, the judge dismissed the court for deliberation. What followed was a sequence of reactions that transcended the legal system. Outside press swarmed Nada Rubin, but she kept her eyes ahead. She said nothing. just stood tall, the same way she described standing 24 years ago, covered in blood, but refusing to fall. Within hours, the verdict was in, not for the original crime, but for the obstruction investigation surrounding the 1999 shooting. Federal prosecutors announced that Jennifer Lopez would be summoned for a grand jury testimony in connection to possible perjury and obstruction of justice. No charges yet, but no more silence either. Lopez, through her attorneys, stated she would cooperate fully. A quiet admission that the walls once impenetrable are no longer holding. But it wasn't just Lopez's world that shifted. Sean Diddy Combs now faces multiple federal investigations, linked not just to the 1999 shooting, but to an alarming pattern of alleged coercion, witness tampering, and violent behavior stretching over decades. And while his legal team scrambles to challenge each case on technical grounds, the public sees a broader truth. For years, victims like Ruben Bongalan and Ventura were silenced by money, fear, and influence. Today, they are at the center of a story that can no longer be ignored. The narrative is no longer one of celebrity scandal. It is one of reckoning. In the final scene of the trial, the judge addressed the court not as a legal authority, but as a citizen. This case reminds us that truth delayed is not truth denied. Justice may be slow, but it does not forget. The courtroom rose. Ruben exhaled. And outside, as cameras turned away, she whispered the same words she had screamed into the December night in 1999. "I'm not finished. I still have work to do." This time, the world listened.